back to EDH Deck Building. I am your host, Demo, and this is 10 cards you should be putting in your Commander decks, episode 51. And we are starting out this week with Planar Chaos 2 and a red enchantment. At the beginning of your upkeep, flip a coin. If you lose the flip, sacrifice Planar Chaos. Whenever a player casts a spell, that player flips a coin. If they lose the flip, counter that spell. So as soon as you see this card, you automatically think, oh, it goes in a coin flipping deck. And of course it does. There's lots of coin flipping going on with this card. So if you have coin flipping triggers, this is going to be a great fit for that. It also is a good fit if you are playing a chaos deck. I mean, it has chaos in the name, so that sort of goes without saying as well. However, I think this card is actually just a great strategy piece. At the beginning of your upkeep, flip a coin and sacrifice it obviously isn't going to happen right away, right? You're going to play this on your turn and then just pass your turn. And now on all of your opponent's turns, whenever they play a spell, they're going to have to flip a coin, and if they lose the flip, it'll get countered. That's actually pretty darn good, right? It's essentially a 50-50 chance that your opponent's spells are all going to get countered. So your opponents might not want to cast them, right? It's very likely that as long as Planar Chaos sits on the table, your opponents aren't going to want to cast any important spells at all. It's really going to impede your opponents, and then once you get around to your turn, you flip a coin, and if you happen to lose the very first flip, you sacrifice it. It's okay. I think you got enough value out of it just for that one turn cycle. But if you happen to win the flip, now you can do it again. And if you're in a deck where maybe like an aggro theme where you want to be attacking and not necessarily casting a lot of spells, you're probably not going to have any issue just sitting there swinging every turn and nobody wanting to cast any spells. That probably will work good for you. So this card actually could work surprisingly well in a lot of different strategies. Coming in at number 2 is Planar Collapse. 1 and a white enchantment at the beginning of your upkeep. If there are 4 or more creatures on the battlefield, sacrifice Planar Collapse and destroy all creatures. They can't be regenerated. This is one of my personal favorites. It has been for a long time. I've mentioned it a couple of times on my channel already, I think. It is, as far as I know, the cheapest board wipe out there. It's 2 mana, right? This is 2 mana. Destroy all creatures. Only if there's 4 or more creatures on the battlefield, but probably not going to want to board wipe otherwise, right? You're going to play it and you're going to have to wait until your next upkeep. Of course, that being the downside. This can't be all upside, right? There has to be a little bit of downside here because it is a 2 mana board wipe. The other huge added bonus here is that it is a permanent, and that is why I like it. It's a lot easier to reuse. So for example, in a Lurrus deck, I think it's fantastic. It is a 2 mana card that you can play out of your graveyard if you need to get a board wipe out of your graveyard. Not a lot of other cards in the game are going to fit that scenario. If you're in an enchantment theme where maybe you can get your enchantments back out of your graveyard, again, same sort of scenario. I had also just put this in my AO deck that I did recently because it's a permanent that I can get off the top of my library when my commander dies. And I'm not going to care because my commander just died, so this is going to wipe everyone else off the board. My commander's already gone, so it's not going to really bother me. Really efficient board wipe, but also I think really fits well in a lot of different decks. Coming in at number 3, Planar Gate, 6 mana artifact. Creature spells you cast cost up to 2 less to cast. So pretty self-explanatory. This is a really expensive card because it is a really old card and has never been reprinted. But I always like to throw out these cards that have these very unique abilities. Just all your creature spells costing 2 less to cast can be really good if you're in a super creature heavy deck. Probably in a creature heavy deck that isn't green, right? Green usually doesn't have any problem getting the mana it needs to cast stuff. So if you're in a really creature heavy deck that isn't in green, this might be a good consideration for you. Coming in at number 4 is Plea for Guidance. 5 and a white sorcery. Search your library for up to 2 enchantment cards. Reveal them and put them into your hand, then shuffle. So I kind of came across this card and I was like, oh yeah, I forgot about this card. I had actually made a couple of decks recently that sort of care about enchantments and want specific enchantments to be in play. And, you know, you go for the usual suspects like Idyllic Tutor, Enlightened Tutor. Moonblessed Cleric is another great one that has come out recently that I use a lot. 6 mana is a lot, but searching for 2 enchantment cards, we all know tutors are really great in this format, and enchantments are really great in this format, right? There's a lot of fantastic enchantments that you can get with this card. You can also get auras. If you're in that mono white or Boros aura and equipment theme, this can go get auras as well. Just another option that I think a lot of times gets overshadowed. Coming in at number 5, Porphyry Nodes. 1 white mana enchantment. At the beginning of your upkeep, destroy the creature with the least power. It can't be regenerated. If 2 or more creatures are tied for the least power, you choose one of them. When there are no creatures on the battlefield, sacrifice Porphyry Nodes. This has been a card that I've always been super interested in. I love all of these color change cards from Planar Chaos. For those who don't know, these sort of funny looking off-color cards that they have from Planar Chaos are color change versions of older cards, right? So Porphyry Nodes originally was Drop of Honey. Drop of Honey was the green version of this card. And basically what they did is they took old cards where they're like, that doesn't really make sense that it's a green card, it's destroying creatures. So they flipped it into a white card because that made more sense, because white does kill creatures really well. The only thing I'll say about this that I actually don't like it in white is because it's destroying small creatures, or at least it's gonna kill the small creatures first. It's gonna kill the creatures with the least power, and typically white likes to kill bigger creatures and save the creatures with lower power. So it actually, for that reason, doesn't fit in the typical white theme. However, this is a card that for 1 white mana, you can just throw it down on turn 1, and assuming there's already creatures in play, it's just going to start killing a creature every single turn. It's a really powerful effect. If you have a buddy who has an aggro theme, this is going to slow them down quite a bit. The other thing is it is not targeting. This is just going to destroy the creature with the least power. It doesn't matter if it has hexproof or shroud, and it can't be regenerated. And if there's a tie, then you get to choose, okay? So that can also be important as well. Really interesting card. Another really interesting card is Powder Keg, coming in at number 6, and it might not seem like it at first because it might seem like there's a lot of other cards that do this, but there actually is not. So 2 mana artifact, at the beginning of your upkeep, you may put a fuse counter on Powder Keg. Then you can tap and sacrifice Powder Keg to destroy each artifact and creature with mana value equal to the number of fuse counters on Powder Keg. So there are cards like this in the game. The reason why this one in particular is different from a lot of those other ones is because it says specifically destroy each artifact and creature with mana value equal to the number of fuse counters on it. And because of that wording, there is some interesting things you can do here. Now, first of all, you can play this right away and destroy all the tokens, right? All the artifact tokens, all the creature tokens, they're all going to be mana value 0. This is going to have no counters on it right away. So you can just play this for 2 mana and immediately tap and destroy all the artifact and creature tokens. Other thing this is going to do is it's going to destroy all the artifact lands, right? This is not non-land. So anyone who has artifact lands, they're going to be a 0 mana artifact. Those are going to get destroyed. You can also get into the mean scenario here where you turn your opponent's lands into creatures, which is what one of my patrons did in a game recently in their Joel Riel deck, where Joel Riel is turning players' lands into creatures. They are now going to be creatures and they are going to be mana value 0. So you can use this on your opponent where you turn all their lands into creatures and then crack this, and all their lands are creatures which are mana value 0, so they'll get destroyed right away. So that's a whole ton of ways to use this card without even putting a single fuse counter on it, just immediately playing it and cracking it. Really good card in a lot of scenarios, I think. Coming in at number 7, Power Stone Minefield. Another one of my personal favorites too. Red and a white enchantment. Whenever a creature attacks or blocks, Power Stone Minefield deals 2 damage to it. So just a great card if you want to be sort of preventing attacking, just keep your creatures away from mine. Obviously, any creature with a toughness 2 or less is immediately going to die as soon as it attacks. So it's going to prevent that scenario. You got a lot of buddies with a lot of token decks. This might be really good against it. I like it in a Tajic deck. I put it in my Tajic deck because Tajic is going to prevent non-combat damage to your other creatures. Now, this will kill your Tajic, so you can't attack with him, but all your other creatures, this damage will be prevented. And then when your opponent's creatures block, they're going to take 2 damage. So it's an extra 2 damage that sort of helps you out in combat. And if your creature's got first strike, it's even extra good there. So if you have a commander that maybe you got first strike with, you attack with it, it's going to deal its damage first. As soon as the opponent's creature is declared as a blocker, this will trigger and hit it for 2. And then because your commander has first strike, or whatever creatures you have first strike, they'll deal damage. So it's an extra 2 damage basically added on to the first strike, if you understand my meaning, right? So you're basically going to kill your opponent's creatures before they ever have a chance to deal any damage to you. Just a really great card. I think it could be used in a lot of different decks. Coming in at number 8 is Power Conduit, 2 mana artifact. artifact. Tap, remove a counter from a permanent you control. Choose one, put a charge counter on target artifact or put a +1/+1 counter on target creature. So obviously the scenarios here, putting charge counters on stuff and putting +1/+1 counters on creatures, those scenarios this is going to fit in, right? Any of those decks where you're doing stuff like that, you might want to throw this card in here. However, the reason I absolutely have to give this card a mention is because it is removing any counter from any permanent. That can be really, really important. There is lots of cards where you might want to be removing counters from stuff, right? Obviously, you can proliferate. There's lots of ways to add counters to stuff. Removing counters can be difficult. There's not a lot of cards in the game that do that, and this is one of them. I put a +1/+1 counter on a creature I control is just an added bonus for me with this card. This card is I want to remove counters from stuff. Sagas are a perfect example. If you want to remove counters from them to set them back to chapter 1 or chapter 2, keep them from getting removed, you can just keep removing a counter from it every single turn so that you can keep reusing the same effect over and over again is a good example of where you might want to be removing counters from stuff, right? So got to give this card a mention because sometimes having to remove counters from stuff can be really, really important. Coming in at number 9 is Predatory Advantage. 3 red and a green enchantment. At the beginning of each opponent's end step, if that player didn't cast a creature spell this turn, create a 2/2 green lizard creature token. I just really love cards like this. Like, I don't know exactly what deck you would put this in. Off the top of my head, maybe a Grumgully deck, because Grumgully wants non-human creatures to be coming into play all the time, so it can put counters on them. So now you're going to get a 3/3 lizard. I don't know, maybe you're doing lizard tribal. I have no idea what the specific scenario is where you play this card. I just really love cards like this. Enchantments that sit on the battlefield, you put 0 resources into them, and they just give you value. At the beginning of each opponent's end step, if they didn't cast a creature spell, you get a token. So this can be 3 times per turn cycle, right? I mean, it's unlikely that none of your opponents are going to cast creature spells, but guaranteed you're going to get at least 1. You might even get more than 1. I know it doesn't seem like a massive upside, but you would be surprised how often if you have a card like this and you just plop it down in a game, nobody will pay attention to it and it'll just sit there and constantly be cranking you out value every single turn. And I just really, really like cards like that. And coming in at number 10 this week is Preacher, another expensive card because it is very old and has never been reprinted. But again, it's just so unique. I just got to give it a mention. 1 white human cleric 1/1. You may choose not to untap Preacher during your untap step, and you can tap for as long as Preacher remains tapped, gain control of target creature of an opponent's choice they control. So it is a white card, a mono white card that is gaining control of creatures. That's just so very unique. I just recently put this in the Masako, the humorless deck that I did because I thought it was a good fit there because you're doing a little bit of a tap theme and you want your creatures to be tapped, so that fit. If you're in a theme where you want to be stealing your opponent's creatures and then sacrificing them, that can also be great. If you're in blue, there's lots of creatures that do that, but if you're in white, you don't have access to blue and you want to do something like that. Not a lot of creatures that do that. In fact, this is the only one, right? This is the only mono white creature that is going to be gaining control of your opponent's creatures. They get to choose, but that's okay. It's still a mono white creature that is gaining control of other creatures, and you just never see that. So I gotta give this card a mention. But that is it for today. That is 10 more cards you should be putting in your Commander decks. And if you are thinking of purchasing any of these cards, I have a TCG Player link. It is in the description below. Please give it a click. It helps support the channel, but that is it for today, and thanks for tuning in.